Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, no travel this week, so that's good. Although I do have a day-long virtual meeting with FDA in about an hour and a webinar to host on Wednesday. And I might be going down to Capitol Hill next week for some lobbying stuff. But, okay, there's some heavy-duty activity taking place, but you guys are all distracted by the TikTok ban and all that stuff. And, I've got all the things that go on behind the scenes. So anyway, before we started recording, this week's guest asked me how I support the podcast. And instead of just saying I have a day job, I sort of launched into a whole thing about what I do and what my trade association is and my history editing business-to-business magazines before that, because my guest was a magazine editor, although not of contract pharma and auto laundry news and things like that. In fact, anyway, let's just dive into this week's show because I love our guest's new book and really want to get this to you. My guest was Adam Moss. And he was the former editor of New York Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, and a few other books. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that in his bio. The important thing is he has a new book out now called The Work of Art: How Something Comes from Nothing. It's published by Penguin Press, and it is an absolutely gorgeous and amazing piece of work. The Work of Art consists mainly of 43 interviews Adam did with a variety of artists. And that's painters, sculptors, poets, novelists, musicians, drag performer, screenwriters, critics, crossword puzzle editor, and all sorts of other culture-making figures. And in each one, he and his subject trace the creation of a single artwork of the subjects, and in the process explore creativity and the flow state of art making, the act of revision and editing, and well, the three phases of making art that Adam goes into, and all the sort of common traits he starts to build among some of these, I'll say, top tier artists, although, it's an ambiguous term, I guess. Anyway, the conversations themselves are fascinating, but the book is also just this beautiful, I'll say, artifact. It's designed wonderfully with all sorts of visual integrations of not just the work under discussion, but other pieces, earlier in-process images, ways of understanding what the work was before it became what it is, I guess. And the visual exhibits, they add to the texture of creation, if you get me, which is exactly what Adam's getting at through all these interviews. He's sort of trying to conduct archaeology with his subjects, or sort of forensic exploration. And what they dig up is just absolutely beautiful. And throughout the book, he also interjects his own experiences, often in the footnotes, of his relationship to the artists, to their work, his later in life exploration of painting and what he's learned and hasn't learned in the process of becoming a painter, and just of the process of editing in its many, many forms. The work of art, it's illuminating, compassionate, and just a wonderful document about creation, with subjects who range from a under 30 painter named Gerald Lavelle to grandmasters like Stephen Sondheim and Louise Glick. There are two men who build sandcastles. There's all sorts of amazing subjects and amazing artwork incorporated into this book. Now, from everything I've described, you probably can guess that this project of Adam's sort of mirrors or parallels what I've been doing with this podcast for the past dozen or so years. I have to say, since I got up to speed interviewing people for this show, I've grown incredibly critical of other interviewers. Most other interviews I read or watch, I find myself thinking, you dummy, why didn't you ask X, Y, or Z? And I didn't get that in the work of art. Adam does a fantastic job of evoking his guests' insights. Now, this is edited as opposed to my free-flowing verbal thing, but he really does bring the guests' insights. He listens to them, listening to themselves, and revealing something to themselves and to us, and sort of bringing us some of the essence of their artistry. And he captures that in the prose. And it's a very skillful, I would say it's a skillful piece of work. There are many aspects of work that went into making this book. It's really phenomenal. Now, I read the work of art sequentially, but it would work just as well at random. I felt that that there was probably a hidden sequence to it all, or a reason that it was sequenced the way it was, which Adam and I talk about. But again, you could just dive in anywhere. And just like with this podcast, it's the guests who work in fields you don't know much about or don't think you care about where you're going to learn the most. All of which is to say, the work of art knocked my socks off. You ought to go buy it now, go dive in, and let me know what you think of it. Now, as caveats go, there's a little ambient buzz in the audio. I couldn't get rid of that in post. Sorry. Also, some people walking around on the sidewalk right outside where we were talking. You're going to hear them, but, that's part of New York, man. Now, here's Adam's bio from the book. Adam Moss was the editor of New York Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, and 7 Days. As editor of New York, he also oversaw the creation of 5 digital magazines: Vulture, The Cut, Daily Intelligencer, Grub Street, and The Strategist. During his tenure, New York won 41 National Magazine Awards, including Magazine of the Year. He was an assistant managing editor of the New York Times with oversight of the magazine, the book review, and the culture and style sections, as well as managing editor of Esquire. He was elected to the Magazine Editors Hall of Fame in 2019. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Adam Moss. Why did you start painting?
We have a place in Cape Cod, in Provincetown, that we bought just because it was ramshackle and beautiful on top of a hill in Provincetown. But its history, which mattered to me a lot more after I was in the place than it did when we got it, is that it used to be an art school. It's called the Cape Cod School of Art. And, to some extent, it really is full of ghosts.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of feel a history there. It was started by this guy named Charles Hawthorne. Hans Hofmann was the second proprietor of it and head of the school. And then there were other iterations of the school. But there's all these old great pictures of the ladies with bonnets on the dune, just doing their own plein air paintings. And after a while, it just kind of got to me, and it got into it's like I'd always been. I should say that in my magazine career, I'd always been kind of unusually for an editor. Most editors aren't built this way. Very, very interested in visual storytelling, like to an extreme. I mean, it was really, I was constantly trying to figure out ways to make images and text work together in kind of different ways to tell stories. And so image photography. I was just into all that stuff, and after a while, it was just like, well, what the fuck? I might as well pick up a paintbrush and try to see if I can make images myself. So, up at this school, or the
Former school.
Carcass of the school,
the haunted school,
the haunted school. I just, I took a little class. And got the most primitive little basic skills. I mean, nothing. And just started making a painting a day. So my plan was, okay, I'm going to start something in the morning and finish it by the end of the day. And, probably over the course of the summer, 30 days later, I made 30 paintings. And I just loved it in a way that it was a lark at first, and I found that it did that thing that few things do in my life, which is just basically stilled all my anxiety. I had, at that particular stage of my life in particular, I was like an anxious wreck over so much, relating mostly to my work as an editor, and this just stilled it all. So that's a long answer to your question.
No, that's I mentioned to you in an email, I took up drawing at 50, and just drawing the trees in my backyard was exactly that. There were these moments of, hey, wait a second, the voices are gone. Mm-hmm. It's just the eye and the hand. There's nothing rattling in between. Working from a screen, things were different, but being out in nature, just being able to. Do you remember first thing you painted?
I think they were flowers.
Makes sense. There's color, there's shape. It's right there.
And I think it was a big flower. It was kind of dopey. I mean, I did it in a way that is counter to when anyone going to a class or something, there would be a progression that they would do. But me, I just sort of jumped right in.
Same thing. Just try to figure it out.
What was your first thing?
It was trees. And it looks like, as I have put it in a semi-offensive way, it looks like a stroke victim trying to regain function of his hand. And within like 3 or 4 weeks, he figured out bark shading and the foreshortening of the branches coming in, all this stuff. But it just came from looking, like that sort of Rilke.
Well, that's that's really what art training is about, is just teaching how to look. So,
and how did it lead into the work of art?
Well,
we're going to get the leaving magazines right in the middle there, and what that all means too.
So I kind of futzed around painting while I was still doing this other job. I would paint right here at the kitchen table, and in the mornings before I go to work, and that was all fine. It was all in proportion to really what it was and what my talent or lack of talent was. It was just kind of a hobby. And then I quit my job. Which I guess we'll get into, but I quit my job, and I kind of wasn't so bad at the beginning painting, and so that I had this fantasy that since I made a lot of progress at the very beginning, that if I actually devoted myself to it kind of more full time, I might actually get good.
Yeah,
but I didn't get good. I fell right off the cliff, and there are all these reasons that I understood later about why that happened. But it really vexed me. I was kind of tormented by it. So over time, I began to just be obsessed with this question. And then I would see these, I mentioned in the introduction to the book, I would just see these pictures, these artifacts of artists, what I say, caught in the act of making art. These would be studies or doodles, or I've always been attracted to them. They were always actually a sort of significant part of my journalism practice, but I finally realized that what I was trying to, became very obsessive in looking for these entrails. Like I talk about, the book begins with being in Bilbao, and in the gift shop and seeing this kind of doodle scribble, he calls it, that Frank Gehry had made for the as he was imagining Bilbao, the building Bilbao, and the building in Bilbao, because Bilbao is a place. But anyway, and just getting so excited by being in his head. And then it began ultimately to occur to me that I could do a book that was basically a tour of artists' heads. And my journalist head said, okay, that would be interesting. My painter head said, I could maybe figure something out and understand something I really didn't understand, which is how artists think. And I felt that my lack of understanding about how artists think, which is really another way of saying how artists can work alone, what is the inner dialogue that they have. Since my whole career had been based on a dialogue with others, and I didn't know how to talk to myself, I didn't know how to listen to myself. So this book was a way to try to understand the artist's head. You know, that's the long answer. As a way to, you know, maybe make a breakthrough in my painting. So it really, it was a little bit of a project that I thought would be an interesting thing to read and flip through and immerse yourself in, but it also was a kind of search project for myself.
Were you concerned about over systematizing? You know, like trying to find, as a college kid who was a failed writer, you know, the Paris Review writers at work interviews is always, if I read enough of these, some clue will open up and, you know, this will be the key, which of course
I wasn't
doesn't
concerned
exist,
about that. I was seeking it. I wanted it. I mean, I didn't find it. I should, you know,
that's what
spoiler
I'm
alert.
Yeah.
You know, there's no. I did not unlock the key to creativity. But I did discover a whole mess of things that were helpful to me, and you know, maybe helpful to a reader. I don't know, but but I did find the journey kind of fascinating.
Did you make a point of trying to cover an array of art forms, not simply painting? I'll say, just as a reader, it feels like you grooved more with the writers and columnists. Like it was really the Wesley Morris one where I had he's bringing his editor history, not explicitly into this, but it's informing the way, you know, you can. Did you find that you were connecting with certain types of artists, or is it just an individual personality thing when it came to
No, I mean, I think
how
it's really
conversations
interesting
went?
to me that, you know, I have my own feelings about which of these are the most successful or not that I don't share with anyone.
No, of course not.
But
they're all your favorite children.
yeah, exactly. But I have heard from a lot of people now in the book. It's been out for, you know, we're talking in the middle of May, and it's been out for about a month. And you know, pretty much I've heard every single chapter cited by someone as the one that they most responded to. So that's kind of amazing to me and great. But no, I think that the reason, like a Wesley Morris, I mean, there are some people, like I know Wesley a little bit, so that there's a kind of personal connection in there, and also I've had a kind of lifelong, adult long interest and fascination with criticism and the ways in which criticism changes. So I was like, I had a head start in trying to understand what he was trying to do, which I deeply admired, and. You know, novelists, certainly the sort of literary journalists like Gay Tullius or something, these are people I either knew personally or I knew their work. I was really kind of saturated in it. So that's one kind of thing. Then a completely other kind of thing was talking to the visual artists, because they were... you know, they were the people I wanted to be. They were my little heroes that I was aspiring to. So that there's that category, and I was hungry, really hungry, for what they had to tell me. And then there were just, you know, like as a journalist, I was just into some things that were larks. Like, you know, at one point I have conversations with David Mandel, who ran the show Veep, and I just really wanted to get at the making of a joke. And how you make a joke, or Raz Chast, the cartoonist, and you know, something that basically gets created in about 3 minutes, or the my friend who is an amazing graphic designer, Ian Adelman, who is also an amazing sandcastle maker, about a thing that he makes, these extraordinary structures they just disappear at the end of the day, wiped away by the water or the rain or
little kids stomping on them.
Or little kids stomping on them. And
the great one of the restaurateur.
Yes, couple. And the restaurateurs, these are the restaurateurs that I go to all the time, and so I have a kind of, food relationship to them. I mean, whatever. But I would say that the people I most responded to in a lot of ways were the oldest people in the book. I found that in a lot of cases, the wisdom that they had accreted over the course of their lives and their own the introspection that comes with older age really served the purpose of the book. They were just so thoughtful and really wanted my participation in helping them think through this mystery that had consumed their life.
Had it started as a book idea? Or was it more, I'm having these conversations and these are starting to turn into something?
I'd say it started as a zine idea.
Haiku for business travelers, right?
I was like, I really like these little, bespoke pieces of I don't know, little magazine fragments type things, and I like the fact that it didn't obey any rules, and you could just make the whole thing up. And as I said, this thing. Well, maybe I didn't say it here, but this thing started just as collecting these artifacts, these half-made doodles and studies, and I just love them. They move me more than the finished object usually moves me, and I kind of wanted to just take a whole batch of them and put them between two pieces of paper with a staple and say, voila, here it is. And then I had started having the conversations, which were just meant to be captions, really. And the conversations were very interesting to me. And so then it started to become a book. But also the other thing is that with the kind of decline of the physical magazine, books are a kind of healthy business, bizarrely. They're a weird business because a few books carry the rest of them as a business. But, book publishers are, for the most part, doing pretty well. And so I thought to take some of the things I loved about magazines, properties of storytelling, particularly visual text interaction storytelling, and apply them to a book where maybe they could live healthier, in a healthier way. And so then I just like, okay, maybe I can make a book that just doesn't feel like a book I've read before. So I tried to do that.
Visually, it certainly has that to it. It's gorgeous to look at the flow of it all, and the structure and the way it's put together is absolutely gorgeous. You mentioned your interest in visual storytelling throughout. How much was you and how much was a graphic designer that you were working with? Did you have a sort of vision for what you wanted, or was it sort of, I trust?
No, it was definitely a partnership. Yeah. The designer for the book is, there were several of them, but they were all led by a guy named Luke Heyman at Pentagram, who was the design director of New York. I hired him as the design director of New York Magazine when I got there. And so he and I have a history and a little bit of a mind meld.
And that's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
how much
about how we do this. And I came to him and I said to him, I said to him two different things. One of which was just, I'm looking to make this kind of, I called it a kind of museum of creativity, which is that you'd have all these artifacts. The visuals were, as I say, the driving force at the beginning. And then there'd be like wall text, which would be me and the artist talking. And the reader would be like walking through the galleries and blah, blah, blah. But really, it was just total bullshit. And Luke nodded. And then I said, another idea for it is I kind of wanted the whole thing to be a little bit of a diagram, so that the text, the artist talking or me talking, would then what I called would tumble into the image, and the image would stand for the words, so that the whole thing would be a kind of giant pictogram. And Luke very patiently explained to me why that would not work within the physical dimensions of a book. It might work digitally, but it wouldn't work in a book.
Thinking Ways of Seeing, that John Berger book,
yes.
But that's a really rare exception.
Well, no, but even he had problems with it because you can't predict where the images fall. So the images, you can have a whole bunch of text, and then the image, you've got like 1 inch for the, So anyway, it doesn't work. But Luke said, like, all right, let's take that as the brief and let's figure out where to go from there. And then, eventually we developed this language, visual language in the book. He and his team, with arrows, which became red arrows. And then I started to layer on footnotes. The footnotes came later in this kind of Talmudic way that it talks to the text. That got integrated later, and I had a lot of fun. That was a joyous period of the book, putting it together, because the whole thing, writing the book, was so lonely, and then making the book physically was something I went to Pentagram's very cool offices and just could hang out there and play with them. And they were wonderful and accommodating, although I'm sure I drove them crazy. And we made a book.
Did it put you back in magazine mode, those days of which raises my question.
Yep.
I bumped into Graydon Carter about a month or so before he left Vanity Fair, and we were in the Ottawa airport. I was lobbying Health Canada. He was visiting family. That's one of those. He didn't recognize me, but I recognized him, so we talked.
Did you know him?
I'd never met him before, but it was relatively obvious. That's Graydon Carter. I should go introduce myself.
The hair alone, you can...
Yeah, that was pretty much... I was reading an Anthony Horowitz novel, and that was my my tell. We talked. I emailed him afterwards because, again, he was about a month away from leaving the magazine. And I zapped him because I had quit my 20 years of trade magazines in 2014, and had started this trade association thing. And I thought, it's going to be presumptuous, but I'm going to let him know, when you no longer are producing something that comes out regularly, and you've been doing that your entire adult life, it's weird.
Yeah.
Like when you don't have a deadline and nothing is coming out.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, and I'd wondered for you whether, starting with painting, whether that was not a substitute, but I need to produce something because I'm not producing a thing that's coming out weekly or monthly.
See our little mouse?
Oh, nice. Well, we're in New York. But he did not write back. I may have had an out-of-date email. He may have already been on the way out from Vanity Fair. And, of course, he started Airmail months later.
Well, he'd been doing other things also. He'd produced something on Broadway with Bette Midler, I think.
But a regular, periodic thing.
Yeah. It's definitely...
getting back into the
it's definitely weird. Yeah. It's an abrupt break, which I saw it. I wanted that abrupt break, but it was.
But you didn't know what it was going to mean.
I didn't know what it was going to be. Yeah. No. I mean, I think I painted really to have something to do. I think you could go crazy otherwise, and also. As I said, I really enjoyed it, even though it tortured me.
There are different ways of having midlife crises.
Exactly.
For my old man, it was Corvette, motorcycle, and 18-year-old girlfriend. For me, it was drawing. For you, painting.
Sure. But then I did seek the making of something that making something different. I don't know. I mean, I kind of didn't have any clue about how to write a book, so it's not like I went back to something I knew how to do. It's just, I had the time to pursue this kind of crazy idea. And so COVID happened. I guess it's worth saying that, that I got this idea right before COVID and then wrote a proposal during COVID. And also I think that the book itself was very influenced by COVID in the sense that, a lot of the book a lot of the present tense of the book is COVID, but also
many of the artists seem to be. It's
they're
informing how they're talking to you.
in their world, and also it's important to me in retrospect that we were talking during COVID, which was a period when they were more introspective. See, what was after the whole thing was a kind of honesty and self-scrutiny that I didn't often hear from artists. And every time I use the word artists, I don't mean visual artists. I mean the whole shebang. And I felt that a lot of the ways in which artists talk are either self-serving or sort of bullshit. They're just kind of canned stuff that they use to promote their work. Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't ever what I wanted to hear, and it wasn't, to me, truthful to their day-to-day experience. And I wanted to know about their day-to-day experience for my own selfish reasons, but also a little bit as a reader or whatever, as a consumer. So COVID offered this period where they may have been making something, but they were not promoting anything. They were not stuck in the machinery. And so they tended to be, and also COVID, it's like everybody was thinking, well,
end of the world,
or end of my life or whatever. And so they put them in a period of reflection. Reflection was very good for what I was trying to do in this book.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn about writing as opposed to the visual art that you're focused on? This is the first book you've written. Yeah.
What I learned about writing myself.
Yeah. What did you learn about?
I learned that I was a terrible writer, but I didn't actually learn that because I knew that already. When I first started to write this book, it was just so bad.
You're hoping to just have interview excerpts and nothing.
Well, I did say to someone, maybe even said publicly, that I tried to create a book that was writer-proof in order to insulate it from my own sins as a writer. And I've always been way too self-conscious as a writer. And I did start this book with this idea in my head that was just, I don't know where I got it from, but that there was a certain way to write. I'm very, very impressionable. And I just kept trying to ape other people's styles. And the book was Baroque and ornate. And my editor self recognized that it was pretty terrible, but I couldn't figure out how to solve it. Over time, I taught myself how to write, and I just stripped and stripped and stripped and stripped all the ornamentation off of my writing, and eventually found my voice. I can't say that I ever really enjoyed the writing process, but by the end, I knew how to do it, and. One of the response. I'm really pleased when people say, "Oh, well, that book's really well written," because it was that was just not true at all for most of its life.
It has a conversational tone.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, exactly what you're talking about. You get away from everything. It doesn't have to be information, but it has to be...
Well, I want it to feel authentic. So, that was important. Yes.
And I'm glad. This is the first time I've heard your voice. So I'm saying it does fit with the tone of the book itself. But
so you think the book sounds like what I'm talking to you right now?
A bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, my writing sounds exactly like mine because I tend to speak in complete paragraphs with lots of clauses, and that's pretty much exactly what you're going to encounter when you
that's pretty
fall
good.
Into my stuff. It's unfortunate, really. It's a sign that I'm way too stuck in my own head. But yeah, it's something. But
we are, one of the lessons of the book, however obvious it is we are who we are, and it immediately attaches to whatever we make, no matter how much we might try to run from it. A lot of the artists in the book, for instance, did spend a lot of effort running from themselves, or do spend a lot of effort running from themselves, but in the end always surrender.
Was there, not to say a favorite, because we know they're all your perfect children, was there one that was particularly revelatory for you, that was a sort of turning point by any means?
There were a gazillion.
Okay, I didn't know if there's one that really, I've been doing the wrong thing this whole time. I need to look at it this way, or is that just the gestalt?
I can approach this in different ways, so that I can tack the answer to your question in different ways. One of them, just understanding that the method of the book would work. I went to Michael Cunningham, the novelist, to talk about the origin of the hours, and I had this theory about the book, which is that if I could find these physical records of the beginning of a work, that might trigger memory that would be truthful and almost archaeological in discovering the history of something. And he and I literally went through garbage bags of paper looking for early drafts of the hours, and then finally found something on an old computer drive, and it was revelatory to him. So that I knew that the method of the book, revelatory to him, produced a different understanding that he had about how the trajectory of the book actually went. So that helped me with the method of the book. In terms of it's like life. I mean, some things were just astonishing. The stories themselves are astonishing. The story of the making of the documentary capturing the Friedmans is kind of spellbinding, and just filled with twists and turns that would make its own excellent movie. But sometimes it was just a simple little thing, like talking to Louise Gleck, the poet, and she decided she wanted to talk about this poem called Song, and so we talked about how it began. I started always with the same question, which was with the first moment. If you could trace the very, very first moment of this work, what would it be? And she said, well, I know exactly what it would be, which is that I had this dream, and I dreamed a sentence or a phrase, and the phrase something like, Leo Cruz makes the most beautiful white bowls. It was something very close to that. And she said, I say this to you, and I even as I say it, it just seems like the most prosaic kind of statement. And it did to me. It just like, yeah, okay, that's a nice sentence, but like what? But for her, it was the key to unlock this incredible poem. And so starting from the banal to the sublime was, even though it was a kind of subtler narrative, was just as shocking and fabulous to me as those that were more, just more like, wow, that happened. And then for painting, yeah, really, like, there's like pages and pages of the book are devoted to the iterations of a painting by the abstract painter Amy Sillman, and just seeing how many times this painting just completely changed. I mean, completely changed, including wipeouts, was very reassuring and interesting. And then her narration of why she made the choices she made along the way were surprising and deeply, deeply rewarding to me as a listener and as a painter.
It's something we all struggle with in different ways in different art forms, but especially in the visual arts, knowing when something is finished. Because the Silliman piece really captures the infinite iterations things can take, which is, of course, paralyzing to people like you and me, neurotic Jews, we can say.
Yes.
But I mean, in the introduction, you've got this incomplete, just started picture by Alice Neal.
Yeah.
And I think it's the Cheryl Pope one that's also what you show at the beginning of that section is an earlier stage of something which turns out to be better than the final.
Well, that's my view. But
no, it is. To me also, it was the, that's what it should have been. And even for yourself, spoiler alert, at the end of the book, there's a comparison of one of your paintings in process, and the unfinished one with a few more touches would be...
It's better.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Yeah. So what is that sense of even learning when is something finished or is the incomplete?
Well, I mean, it's or is
that what you have to learn ultimately?
You have to learn it, but I don't think anybody has the right answer. Lots of reasons things end. I mean, Amy Sillman's, she ends when she kind of has just exhausted her bag of tricks, and it's almost arbitrary where she ends. And the point, I mean, the fabulous thing about those paintings is that fabulous and in some sense tragic is that how many beautiful paintings she destroyed on the way to making the end painting. But she doesn't care. That's what the painting is kind of about. And why do people stop. They stop because they're afraid another round is going to fuck it up. They stop because they're suddenly bored with the thing, or they can't think of anything else to do, or they're just too tired. Or in the case of sandcastles, say it's the end of the day. There are lots of different reasons, and it is a judgment, just like every other stage is a judgment. I mean,
there's another one also. There's a black artist, young artist.
Gerald Lavelle.
Yeah, you show the early stage of his scissors picture.
Yeah,
that one
you
also.
like it better the earlier.
Exact same thing, because it's hinting at what's there, but doesn't.
Well,
have
I
to
like
be
all
everything.
that stuff. I mean, I don't know that he would say that, but I'm.
No, in fact, he comes out and praising his final one.
Yeah.
This is a big breakthrough for him. I'm like, it was. But,
yeah. Well, I mean, you probably like me, so you're probably a good reader for this book. Just have a taste, a taste for a thing that still holds promise. A thing
holds its making.
Holds its making and shows its making, and that the reader, viewer brings something to it and fills it in and takes it somewhere else. I find that, just amazing. I use this phrase in it that's, where the work itself still is a verb, not a noun. It's still in action. I just find that deeply appealing.
Demos of songs that you like. For me, those were the moments when I realized in my writing, I'm not going to be Pynchon or Roth, the other Roth, not this one, right out of the box, that everything is revision. I told this story before, but it's an Elvis Costello demo that I had this is really good, but I see where the final one is so much better, and why the lyrics had to change, and why this bridge goes a little differently, and that I understand things weren't studio perfect right out of the gate. That play into your mentality, and there isn't a lot of music taking place here. Although we do have several.
There are several. I mean, there's actually as many musicians as anything else. But I mean, it's also
it's a different sort of.
It's a different sort of thing, and it's a little complicated to put in the pages of a book. Yeah. It's been sort of fun to talk about some of this in places where people can play the music and play the early iteration.
I don't have rights clearances to play all this stuff.
So anyway, it's fun to do that. But and I have a dog and pony show a little bit that I am taking on the road that has some music in it. Yeah. Just under 15 seconds, so it's all legal. So hearing the early versions of something is always amazing to me. And especially because of my own, again, almost academic interest in this, forensic interest, to hear what was there at the very beginning. There's always something there at the very beginning. Yeah. And sometimes it's the essence of it, and sometimes it's just the seed. But to identify that first little bit that leads to other bigger bits, it feels great and fascinating and reassuring.
Your most intimidated moment? I'm assuming Sondheim.
Yeah, well, definitely Sondheim. I mean, it was Sondheim. Well, both Sondheim and Louise Gluck, the two artists who are no longer here. Sondheim, because I'm just such a worshiper. But the good thing about him for this is that he's really interested in this kind of, I'll use that word again, introspection about his own work. He wrote 2 books, Finishing the Hat, Look, I Made a Hat, and Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat, both riffing off of a song about making, from Sunday in the Park with George, about the sort of exhilaration of the creative act and its destruction, its consequences. And so I was just, I'm just so in awe of him. But he egged me on. He was very.
He sounded very giving.
He was very giving. He was very, supportive of me, and I think he was used to people who were just in a puddle talking to him. Also, I had met him before, so it was a little bit easier. And then Louise was just because she was she is such a formidable figure and stern figure. And, when I was like negotiating with her as to how we would talk about this, again, this was obviously during COVID. And I suggested, as I had for the COVID cautious, always offered Zoom as a possibility. Zoom was like all the rage at the time. Yeah. And she just sent me back this email that was like, no, period, Zoom, period, ever, period. She just was like, I was not able to see her. She wouldn't let me see her because, of course, she was an older woman who was very self-conscious about being looked at through a Zoom screen. And anyway, she also, everyone I know who has ever known her is somewhat intimidated by her. So I went in a bit terrified, but she was, I fell madly in love with her. And she and I had quite a good time, and it was fun to break her down, to basically get her to trust me, which took a little bit.
Every interview is seduction. Not to imply anything, but
no, that's what it is, definitely.
In fact, what did you learn about interviewing through this? Or did you pretty much bring your skill set into this?
I don't really have a skill set as an interviewer.
I didn't know.
I'm not really an experienced.
Now you are
journalist as a maker. I'm an experienced journalist as an editor, which is different, and it's a completely different dynamic. But I think the first thing is I kind of knew beforehand that if I could get people who were willing to, as I put it, jinx the muse, which is to say...
What are you working on next? Sorry.
Well, basically, just people are very superstitious about talking about how they make anything because they think that some covenant with something or other is going to just snap. If they talk about it, it'll be like a kinahora. And anyway, so the people who were willing to take up the project that I was proposing to them were already receptive to what I wanted to talk about. And I did say, I don't want to talk to you about your private life, and I don't want to talk to you about any of the things that you feel dodgy about and other kinds of conversations. I just want to talk to you about this one particular thing. And I did find that limiting it that way, and them understanding that we were collaborators in trying to put something together rather than me being an antagonist, I learned was very important. Obviously know their shit, go in there and have read the thing thoroughly and gotten every piece of information you can about them and about how they think and about the work you're talking about. You can't be over-prepared. And then the other thing is, during it, you just have to listen, because they're going to take you all sorts of other places. You're going to throw all that planning right out the window.
I've got notes, but really,
it's just, it's just wherever and you kind of want that. You want the subject's mind to drift, and maybe it'll drift to interesting places, and if it drifts to not interesting places, you can always cut that out, and they eventually get somewhere anyway.
When you mentioned not talking about anything personal, I figured I should ask, raised observant?
As a Jew?
No. or just Jewy?
Definitely Jewy. The opposite of observant.
Just assuming, but just
super secular, but very saturated in like Jewish way of looking at the world. God knows. So,
where did you grow up? If that's okay to ask.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I was born in Brooklyn. Lived in veterans housing. My parents had also been born in Brooklyn, very Brooklyny, Jewish middle class situation. Then they moved to Long Island, this horrible place called Hewlett, which was near Kennedy Airport, one of the 5 towns.
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up. Although I did spend a lot of time in New York City, which became a kind of beacon for me that I would escape to often, and by myself, but kind of without my parents really paying any attention. I would just spend weekends here, loving it, wandering. I had friends here, and anyway, yeah.
Do you go with the Ron Rosenbaum school of nobody knows exactly what the 5 towns are, or do you have a pretty fixed definition of the 5?
Does he basically say that?
This is the very first piece of Ron's I ever read.
The one on Long Island?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember the piece.
Satan Lives, yeah.
Yeah, Satan Lives, yeah.
Or Satan Lives, sorry.
It was in Esquire. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first, and it was a whole thing about, nobody can actually say which 5 towns are the 5 towns. Okay.
There really are 5 towns.
Yeah.
I was at Esquire when he wrote that piece. Yeah, you want to know them what they are? They're Hewlett, Woodmere, which were the 2 towns that were basically we lived on the actual border. Cedarhurst, Lawrence, and then there was Inwood, which was which one is not like the others because it was basically a much poorer town than these others, which were basically at that stage kind of newer-ish places for Jewish migrants from
escapees.
Yeah, from Brooklyn and the Bronx. Yeah.
I should ask before I get to my actual question. Where did editing start?
Why did I start editing?
Yeah. As somebody who couldn't get a writing/publishing job in 1995 and ended up going into business-to-business magazine editing, I'm just wondering, what was your path?
I mean, my path was just to start. I loved magazines, and magazines were my way of escaping a suburban life that was not a happy place for me. And other people would read books. I just read magazines, and also it was the 60s, and the world that they were describing was very exciting.
Yeah.
And so the magazines were my, Alice in Wonderland, whatever vehicle you want to use, the tea cake. And then I kind of lucked into a bunch of situations. I had a girlfriend who worked at the Village Voice one summer, and I noticed what a great time she was having there. And I got that same internship the next summer. It was the summer of the newspaper strike. It was really an incredible way to be baptized in journalism. And so I thought, like every other young person, that my way of participating in this great journalistic excitement would be as a writer, discovered, as I would later as a painter, discovered that I was a bad writer, and also a very unhappy one. Yeah. But I loved the making of magazines. And so it occurred to me early on that there was somebody who put these things together, had the ideas that animated it, and basically gave it its pulse. Basically were the parent of this organism. And so most writers, young people, don't want to be editors, but I was an early enthusiast.
You go higher up on the masthead.
I just loved the group activity. Yeah. I often describe it as kind of like nursery school. You're all making or kindergarten, you're all making a project together with like construction paper and glue. And that's just always how I felt about it. So I was drawn to editing, and then had some lucky breaks, and eventually found myself kind of good at it, and also in places that needed whatever I had to offer. So that was all lucky.
In the book, you mentioned leaving magazines, or leaving New York Magazine at the end.
Yeah.
When I felt that I wasn't the magazine's audience anymore, that was another reason I quit. Did you change? Did magazines change? Did the audiences change? Or what changed fastest, I guess, that sort of led to that realization?
Well, everything changed.
And I'm sure there's an awful lot of...
all of that changed. I mean, mostly technology changed, and
I'll say as an aside, by the way, I came up in the digital age for layouts.
Yeah.
And if I came up during physical paste up, they would have thought a serial killer was putting the magazine together. I'm so terrible with the manual aspects. I'm like, oh, thank God Quark exists.
Yes, although paste up was really fantastic. I mean, it was just...
I'd always heard.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing a page where you take the... little tiny A and you glue it and correct some spelling of something.
But technology.
Technology, changed what a magazine was and how a reader received it. And I kind of grokked that at the beginning, but then, when it really became so much of a form that, was governed by social media in some ways, that social media became a publishing platform in and of itself. And then also that was how work got distributed to a large extent. It just became further and further from my experience and my own, what I was turned on by in a magazine. But I think what I meant by that sentence is not any of that. It was more that New York Magazine is a magazine for younger people.
Sure.
And I wasn't that young person anymore, and that I have always only known how to edit for myself, and all the magazines I've edited have been governed by my own matrix of interest. They've all been general interest magazines, and and somehow I would assemble a group of people to make this thing that shared a way of looking at the world, and that was the world that the magazine inhabited, and then it wasn't. Yeah. And you had younger people who had different frames of reference than I did, and I thought, okay, it's your turn, and so I left.
I'll say as an aside, I've always considered this gestalt of podcast, the email, the zines and all that to be the Gilroth General Interest magazine, if everybody shared my interests.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that would be a square planet where we're all dressed like Superman and flying backwards or something. Basically, my taste do not.
If you looked at your podcast list, which I did for this, it does add up to a interest matrix that is yours, an identity, and I'm sure that your listeners are those that. I mean, yeah, you could pop in every once in a while if there's a specific person you're interested in, but a regular listener is in some ways someone who's bought into your way of looking at the world.
They write things. They drop me a line occasionally like, wow, you guys were actually listening to that. They start to put together the connecting threads of some of these. Yeah. I always say it's creative people who said yes when I asked them if they'd record, but obviously there's more to it than that. But let me ask about lineage. Mm-hmm. You in the book, you talk about the editors and others who were formative for you. Do you see your influence?
Do I see my own influence?
On others? Without naming names or trashing anybody. But.
Inevitably, sure. It's a little... every generation brings innovation that the next generation then innovates on top of.
Sure.
And I was definitely part of that chain. Specifically, obviously, I've worked with a lot of people who are all over the place.
Yeah, that's all I mean. Not any sort of are people ripping me off as opposed to...
No, I certainly... And there's no such thing as ripping me off at all. But I've worked over the years. My God, I was in magazines for 40 years. And over that time, I worked with a lot of people, and they went to work in other places. And probably they took some of what our experience had been like together and morphed it further. And that's the way it goes. Very happily. I mean, I learned like crazy. I mean, the book does mention some of my mentor types, very important to me. So yeah, sure. Plus probably there's like certain fetishes I had about how to tell stories that I kind of turn other people on to, and then they go and play with them. That's all cool.
Mutation's always great.
Mutation is great, yeah.
Did any of the interviews or artists you were working with or interviewing for the book, we'll say, inspire you to pursue other types of art? I'll say when I recorded with Nicole Rudick, we were discussing her Nikki de Sanfal book, and I had, for a brief time, the thought of, sculpture. I could do something in the backyard with metal, and then I lay down and the feeling went away. But there was that sense of inspiration about a completely different form than I'd been working in.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone suggested a form to me that I hadn't thought of before, but there are definitely things that I wish I could do.
Yeah.
I definitely, I'd love to be a comedy writer. Oh my God, that would be amazing. But my mind doesn't work that way at all. I'd love to be, the whole David Simon chapter is really one of envy because, that's exactly, in some ways, I don't want to say career, but like that's, I would have loved to have been able to take my journalism interest and apply it to television or to like filmic entertainment. It'd be so cool. But I had my own way of expressing myself, and he has another, but he's like incredibly talented at it.
I was glad you cited Brett Martin in the book. Brett and I went to Hampshire together. We recorded when Difficult Men first came out, and then for the 10th anniversary we did a follow-up one. But
that's a really good book, and I hadn't heard of it before, but I was doing my research on David Simon, and there it was, and then he had David Simon. I mean, Brett Martin. I believe it was in a quote from someone else, but he then takes it somewhere. This whole notion of the bounce, which really I just love this idea, and it helps me to define how I work creatively. Like the bounce, just for your listeners, is kind of the ricochet way that people create. You say something, they add to it, talk about mutation, bam, 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 bam. The ball is bouncing to many different people, all of whom together make a thing. And also the ball bounces back and forth between any two people. And that argument or that interchange produces something that neither of them could do alone. So great. That's the bounce. But no, I mean, I've always wanted to make. Would I love to have made, Kara Walker? Would I have loved to make a subtlety, that giant, fabulous sculpture? Oh my God, yes. Would I have loved to paint like Amy Silman? Oh yes. Would I love to? Or even like Gerald Lavelle, who is much more in the style that I do paint in, or would I love to, cook really? I mean, all of it. Part of my experience of these conversations with these people is that they were all, in effect, transferential, which is that I became in love with all of them one by one. And
I prefer vampirism for how this work goes, but however you see it, that's fine.
Yes. So
again,
anyway,
12 years for me, so that's.
But in the end, I'm perfectly happy with what the kinds of things that I do make. So
within the book, you mentioned the bounce. There is that, we'll say, unspoken tension between the collaborative
the group
artist and the solo.
Very, very important distinction in my.
How do you draw that? And you mentioned how the bounce is internal, how you're bouncing off of your own self.
That's what I was going to say, is that I think that I think it's just a different thing entirely when you have to have the whole conversation in your head as opposed to out loud. And in many ways, to the extent that this book, one of the things this book is a record of these physical workings out of making these notes to oneself and letters to self and journals and sketches, and these are all, and doodles, and these are all ways that the solo artist, for the most part, has of, in effect, talking to himself, herself, and they're constantly finding ways to have that conversation just internally. They're writing these, Roz Chass writing these crazy little notes to herself, or There's this whole middle part of making art. I mean, I think of making art in terms of a 3-part process. One being the imagining, N being the shaping being one of applying technique. But there's this whole middle period, which is the judging, which, no one really talks about. And the judging is the evaluating and composing a strategy of how you make something. And it's really where this internal conversation takes place. It's the way in which the artist processes their own feelings of failure and despair and frustration, and it's the place where they actually react to the work, and if they are successful in, as Twyla Tharp says, becoming not me at that moment, they are able to devise a way out. Now, all of this may not be entirely conscious. Sometimes it is, but it's very important.
I was very happy seeing her and Sondheim, and as you mentioned, older guests involved. You have a footnote where you mention failing to get Warren Beatty on board for this, who would have been fascinating, I'm sure. Were there other, not to throw people under the bus, either people you wish you'd gotten in, or somebody who had died before you got the project going that you didn't get to include, that you really, oh man, I wish I'd gotten.
There are many people I tried to get that are now dead. There's a way in which this book could have been like a graveyard, a recent graveyard, because it's really, I tried to get Faith Ringgold, who died just recently. I tried to get Carmen Herrera, who died very shortly after I was trying to talk to her. I never tried to get Frank Stella, who just died last week, but I might have. And so, I did find people at the last stage of their life to be, as I mentioned, I think before, to be particularly good subjects for the book. But there were plenty of people I tried to get. I mean, I'm very happy with this group that I have, extremely happy with them. But, I could show you not thousands, but I could show you many, many letters, very nice letters I got from people explaining the reasons why they wouldn't want to do this. And sometimes it was just, they couldn't be bothered. But other times it was really that they had a serious problem with interrogating this thing for all the superstitious reasons we talked about earlier. Warren Beatty's case was completely different. He just didn't believe. I mean, I think he was disingenuous, but I think he really just wanted to keep me on the phone. He really liked having a conversation with me because he likes a listener. That really wasn't a conversation; it was a monologue. But he never really wanted to participate. But he did make the argument that arguing and collaboration was really the key to all creative making. Now he makes movies and movies do involve a lot of other people and all that stuff. But nevertheless, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to him about this was that I wanted to talk about Shampoo, a movie I really like, and I knew that he had these like epic fights with Robert Towne, who was the screenwriter of record on that movie, and I know that Warren Beatty twisted and turned and fought, and anyway, I just thought all that was kind of amazing. He had no interest in doing that, but he did think that the book ought to be a book about arguing. He was arguing with me, trying to make me do the book about arguing, and I actually agree with him that a book about creative argument would be a good book, and but it's not the book that I had in mind.
Yeah, and there are tensions that underlie. Even when it is a solo artist, like you say, there's still the bounce taking place within them. Yeah. Sequencing the book?
It's a little bit just feel.
Yeah. I assume this is magazine editing Adam coming back to the fore.
I had considered all the obvious things, which is grouping them by category, putting all the playwrights together, etc. That just seemed stiff.
And you'd get overloaded if you tried reading sequentially. You'd get another one. Okay.
Right, exactly. And also, it would be more textbooky. I wanted the book to feel more improvised. There's just a question of, okay, I want to separate out the genres then. Therefore, I wanted to pace it for somebody who's flipping through it so that there's long and short and visual and less visual. If the first two are long, deep, sort of serious things like Kara Walker and Tony Kushner, who opened the book, are, then the next one was going to have to be a sort of palate cleanser in Rouse Chast, who's the third. I want you at this point to laugh. And, so it's those kinds of magazine editor decisions that made sense. I knew the middle of the book had to be these Amy Silman pictures because there's so many of them, and because it would form a kind of centerpiece for the thing. I wanted very much to end with Suzan-Lori Parks, who is, she's a wonderful playwright and songwriter and other things, but she also, her particular story, which was the making of a play called Plays for the Plague Year, which is about COVID, which she let me watch the whole thing, was really about the process of taking her life and turning it into art. And that to me was kind of paradigmatic in a way that was highly, it was a coincidence, but highly, hugely helpful to, kind of conclude the book. It's not the actual conclusion because there's a afterward, and then there's exhibits of historical versions of these artifacts. But it's in the main the way the book ends. So.
And it's the time also. I mean, it is COVID that she's writing about.
Absolutely.
You're also capturing 2020 into 21 with this. I had wondered, because you end with a couple of heavy hitters. With her, the Saunders one feels like the apotheosis of the book in certain ways, and it's the... Okay, he's saving the good stuff for not the good stuff. He's saving some momentous ones. I definitely
loaded the end with some things that I thought were great. I don't believe in front loading everything, but I mean, I was kind of careful to make sure that some of the beauty of the book is, in my view, what I relished in it, is well distributed throughout the book.
Yeah. Again, it's I hate using the term content, so we'll say narratively it flows well. And again, graphically, it's the work that was done here in terms of making the images integrated into the text, and the way you flow it is gorgeous. So
thank you.
I should ask, when it comes to whether or not you consider yourself an artist at this point, I was reminded of Jerry Saltz's big personal essay about his realization that he was not an artist. He could paint, he could make stuff, but he understood he didn't have a vision. And that led me to dropping Jerry a line, which led to him sending a quote, which I'll read you in a minute. But do you find yourself, are you an artist?
I have two contradictory answers to that question. On the one hand, I don't really believe in this
artist, not artist thing.
Artist thing.
You cite Linda Berry in the afterward. So yes, everyone can be an artist in a certain way.
And also you're an artist if everyone's an artist in one form or another. And these lines, or the guild of like, you're an artist, seems arbitrary to me. And I don't respond to it. But the other thing is that I'm definitely not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, well, I'm not a painter. So let's just keep it at that. I'm a person who paints. And I feel like, if to say I'm a painter would be I guess I am a painter to some people. But it's really a useless label for myself, because it puts pressure on the work in a way that cripples the work and cripples the making of the work. So, for me, it's super self-destructive to name myself that way. And I'm just not very good. So I mean, I don't think that matters that much to the sense of whether someone is an artist or is a novelist or whatever. You're a novelist if you write a bad novel, and you're a novelist if you write a great novel. But it's just, it just feels icky.
Do you feel better about your art?
I do, because, because the incredibly pat fact of the book that I'm almost embarrassed about is that the book actually taught me the most obvious lesson in the world. It's like Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home, which is that it really is about the work and not about the thing you're making. I called the book The Work of Art, and I didn't really even understand until kind of the last minutes of writing it that it really is about the work. And, all the artists, everyone would keep saying, I would keep wanting as a writer, I wanted this kind of cathartic moment where they say, and then I made this fabulous thing. And no, they never said, then I made a fabulous thing. Never, never. They would like what they did. They would feel proud of it to some extent. But that was just a passing moment. Nice. Move on. But what their day-to-day life was all in the making of it. And when I realized that, when I truly understood it, when it was truly in my bones, then my painting completely changed. Yeah. Because suddenly I could take joy in the making, the act. I could take joy in a single successful moment. And I was not as preoccupied, which is to say usually defeated by the thing I made. It's just that was just another step in the whole parade of the making of the thing that mostly gave me so much joy. So I accepted the joy.
It reminds me, again, we talk about older guests. I spoke to Seymour Quast years ago before the pandemic, and I was frustrated by the fact that he had no interest in the past. All he was talking about was what he's working on now. I'm like, yeah, but you're 90-something. Let's talk about the early stuff. No, just completely unable or unwilling to look back at all. Everything was just the next piece. Ed Sorel had more give and take and more of a sweeping thing. But again, one of the key figures for all of this for me was sitting down with Jules Feiffer. And Jules at that point was in the middle of his second graphic novel. He'd done a full-length one a year before. And drove out to Sag Harbor where he was living at the time. And 87, maybe 86 he was. And he just, do you want to see some of my pages? And he was just giddy with, I want to show you what I'm doing. And it was like, he was freed. He found a new form for himself. I mean, he's still making art that is clearly Jules Feiffer, but he found another mode in his mid-80s and just was reveling in it. And he's going on and on now into his 90s with this, working in that form instead of just the quote-unquote just a Jules Feiffer cartoon, which in and of itself is a work of genius. But yeah, that sense of not looking back for me, one of the weird things is I make watercolor postcards and just mail them to people. I'll scan it and then it's just gone. I early on had this need to treasure every single thing. I'm like, there's no recording angel. You know what you did. You made something. You know, don't be precious. Go send it out and do something else.
Well, I do take pictures of all my iterations of my painting. And just like the people in the book, there's many, many, many instances, most instances where there's something that I do that I like better than the thing that I've finished.
But you've never gone full Silliman and just covering it over and doing something completely different.
Well, I paint over canvases, sure, but but I like the fact that I have some little record of something that I liked. It's just gives me a certain amount of pleasure to think that at some point I had it. It's like now
before I screwed it up, it was
do whatever. I don't really give a shit so much. If I this thing that tortured me 3 years ago no longer tortures me. So
that's I tend to grab them right at key points before I'm about to do something. It's let me just remember what this looked like before
exactly
before I start putting in the branches and everything else, and it all just.
Why did you start painting again? Because you said you'd painted early on in your.
Oh no, I never had. I thought
in your message it was that you said you picked it up again. After all this
I
you started from scratch. Yeah,
I was 50 a few weeks earlier. I saw the first episode of Painting with John, that Suzan-Lori show on HBO, and I saw Derek DelGaudio's In and of Itself special the same weekend, and I just thought, I got a pad downstairs. I should go outside and try and draw some trees. And that was where it started. And at the time, it was embarrassingly bad, wait a couple of weeks, try something, not be any better. And then it turned into, what if I do this every day and I just pick something else that I see? And did that for months. And everything went well until I showed Jerry some of my stuff, which he was fine with, but I still had I should not be actually showing critic things. I should just be posting them
and sending little postcards to people.
Yeah. Again, my big thing was I was just doing pencil for the longest time, and then the leaves started coming in on the trees. I'm like, God damn it, now I got to figure out color. And that led to
Why did you pick watercolor instead of like oil or acrylic or arbitrary?
Yeah, and I assume the greater sense of impermanence. I had that line, which I've used multiple times in my descriptions of these things, as well as my emails. Destruction is my métier. Really, the purity of the page, just finding a way, or the blank paper, just finding a way to destroy it and make a mark and do something that turns into, at times, something really great. Like the headshot I drew of Tom Carvel, which might be the single greatest thing I've ever done. There was a stretch where...
You have to show that to me.
I will. Trust me. There's a stretch where I would just look on a page, webpage of people who had died that day or who were born that day and try and draw someone. I was like, Tom Carvel, either born or died. Let me look him up. Oh my God, that's the greatest face ever. And I just captured it perfectly. Just
as watercolor?
No, just with a pen. Got the bushy mustache and the smile and the big bulbous nose.
I didn't even know what Tom Carvel looked like.
As didn't I, but a Greek guy who made ice cream is what it turns out to.
Fabulous whales that
Fudgy the Whale and Cookie Puss. Yeah, it was the same mold.
Or something. It was the same mold.
Yeah, it had Cookie Puss, Fudgy the Whale, and the Shamrock one. I forget. But yeah, it was just this degree of at that time learning to look on screens and try to figure out what's there. For me, I had 50 years of reading comics that also graphically embedded in my mind that I didn't understand until certain types of drawing, when I realized, that's how cartoonist X used to do this. Now I get why that line exists where it exists.
Right.
There's a piece in that haiku where I did the face of the boxer at rest. When were you running New York Magazine? What were your years? Do you remember?
2004 to 19.
Okay, so you're semi-responsible for why then. Jerry Saltz had a 2-page spread when...
I did hire Jerry, so...
And the boxer at rest was being shown at the Met, and he did this spread with all these insets around it, explaining what's there. And that got into my brain all those years ago, maybe 2009 or so. So that when I started drawing, I'm like, let me get a picture of the boxer at rest and try to figure out. I've done about 6 or 7 drawings of it since, but one I just focused on the face. Took weeks because inking it was the terror. I wasn't going to use a light box. I was just going to draw on this pencil face that I had done. And what if I screw this up? In the process, I learned about 3 or 4 major cartoonists' reasons why they did certain things, which I didn't realize I was doing as I was focused in on the page. But you learn with no goal. I mean, I have no interest in, I need to have a show, or, this is just some guy in his 50s figuring out how to look at things and try to represent them on a page. So yeah, watercolor, I guess, because it's impermanent. Did a little gouache. Lately I discovered Japanese white-eye birds. I only bring this up. They're these beautiful green and yellow birds with a white ring around their eyes. And I only bring it up because the first time I tried making one, I did no drawing. I literally just painted with watercolor, just made the form itself and went from there. And that was, I've always drawn the eye, I've drawn something, I've done an outline, nothing, and just found the shape and the form and the color simultaneously. Of course, the first one I ever did is the greatest, and every one subsequently is just trying to capture that again, and I fail on numerous ways, but that sense of trying to find what the tools are and trying to figure out what you can do with them, I guess, while holding down a day job, this weird podcast thing and everything else is how I go through my midlife crisis, I suppose. And this is when I told you about long-winded rants that I may edit out of the show. It's exactly what I meant. But let me read you Jerry's quote.
Okay.
Because I wrote him yesterday saying, thanks for connecting me, and we're going to record today. He said, no questions, but he has become a freedom machine. His book is such a specific object, is so singular as a text and idea, it is a work of art into itself. I'm reading it by skipping in and out with no direction at all, reading sections as they seem to call to me. It cut to near the core of where art comes from. I think this is the best nonfiction book of 2024 so far. So he said...
That's super nice.
Yeah, just read him that and see what he says. What is Jerry's advice
Jerry's
question?
I really have to say that I revere Jerry. And I sat down at this very table at one point and I just told him what I was writing. I was trying to make sense of it and add all this stuff up. And particularly I was just obsessed with this question of why is someone talented and another person not talented, and what is talent? I was just really... And he was just like shaking his head and he was just saying, that's just the wrong question. I couldn't stop asking it, but he did so much to help clarify what it was that I could answer and wanted to answer, and I just really always loved talking to him and also reading him. I mean, he's such a fabulously free writer. He writes with so little inhibition, and also a crazy innovator. I mean, he really has invented. I mentioned before the ways in which journalism has kind of moved to social media as I'll use that word, content.
Yeah.
And Jerry's the master at it. He basically has invented his own magazine through his Instagram account, and his videos are just as amazing. And him, and he's a little bit of a genius.
So the question I always ask everybody, which I don't know if you've ever listened to any of the past shows outside of looking over my list of names, what are you reading?
Well, I have been very preoccupied with this
I figured the launch has been a chunk of it. But I'm reading a novel by a friend of mine because I love her. Yep.
And then after that, I'm reading another novel by another friend of mine. So
advance copies or things that are out?
In the first case, it's a book that just came out, and which I should plug. Whatever. It's called The Evolution of Annabelle Craig by Lisa Grunwald, who's someone I worked with at Esquire a million years ago. And then in the second case, it's a novel that my friend is, and this one I won't mention, is trying to get published, and she just wants my opinion about it. But I then the most recent book that I read that seems relevant to all this, I guess, is the oral history of the Village Voice called The Freaks Come Out to Write, I believe, which features Peter Sheldon and because I used to work at the Village Voice for one of my many steps in my magazine life, and a very important one, even though I was really a kid. I loved it. I just completely loved it. I've been reading, I don't know. I mean, I'm a big reader, but I have to get back into the rhythm of...
Oh, that's true. You're a magazine guy. I keep forgetting. That's
also, I've agreed. I mean, I really, really, really like books. I do like books.
Yeah.
I love the book form as a physical thing, but I also just love reading books.
Have you seen Uncropped yet, the documentary about James Hamilton and the
No.
voice? Oh, this is 2 weeks ago for the show. The director, D.W. Young, who made The Booksellers back in 2020.
Yeah.
He's got a movie now called Uncropped. It's playing at IFC, I think.
About James?
Yeah, and about the voice in the 80s and 90s. And then
I
about
should
the
really
Observer.
see that.
It's so good. It's so good. They sent me a screener link. I was just in heaven watching it. Because it uses James, but at times kind of gets away from James into the magazines and The Voice and the New York Herald, where
I
he
think
first started.
the first thing that I really loved as journalism was this a cover story for The Voice when I was there, which was by Mark Jacobson was the writer, and James was the photographer. And
that's
something so many miles in the nick of time, or something like that.
Yeah, no, they go into that.
They go
the
into
movie.
that thing.
Jacobson's in it. He
Mark
talks about the road
He's a
trip.
great figure, and anyway, so and James is so handsome.
That's why I was just like, well, this young picture of him looks pretty. It's like, God damn, he continued to.
He was a great looking dude, boy. I don't know if he still is. I haven't seen him in years.
Oh yeah, the recent footage in the documentary, he's aged well. But it goes in at certain stretches of him and Sylvia Placky and the sort of contrast in their styles of photography. It's really interesting. I think you'll dig it.
Their styles are pretty contrasting, I think.
Yeah. Last question, just so we can jinx the muse. Do you have the book bug at this point, or are you sort of hey, I've made one book and that's perfectly enough for me? That's
I don't have any idea.
Okay.
No, I mean, I really don't have any idea. For the moment, I'm just going
to bask.
Well, take the summer off. And I really enjoyed, look, I spent my whole career telling people who were leaving magazines to go write books, why are you doing that? It's like you spend 3 years to do something and then you make the thing and then it disappears within 2 seconds. And here, you can stay here. You'll reach 1 million readers, 2 million, 10 million readers every time you publish something. Why don't you want to continue to do that? And, I said it for my own self-interested reasons. I always wanted them to stay, and seldom did I succeed. But I now kind of understand why people write books. It does, I think, disappear soon, although happily mine hasn't yet disappeared, but it will soon. And yet there's something about that people just take it more seriously.
If this was a website, no. I mean, it would just be, I checked that out once. I didn't read 43 of them. I read 1 or 2. And
you can hold it, and you can come back to it 5 years later, and it's there. So but it was a lot of work. and do I want to do that, or do I actually want to paint again? Do I want to be painting all the time? And maybe it's that. I don't know. Give it a try this summer.
Good luck. Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Sure.
And this has been, the book is a revelation in a lot of ways, but, I'm really happy we got the time to sit down and do this too. So.
Great. Total pleasure. Thanks.
And that was Adam Moss. Go get the work of art. It's out now from Penguin Press. I don't know how to sell it any more than my intro and our conversation already have, but this is a magical book and one that I hope finds a devoted readership. I really think we've gotten across everything about what makes it a wonderful, wonderful book. So I will say Adam does not seem to have a website, and he's not really on social media. I mean, he kind of sort of is, he hinted, but only as a lurker. And as we all know, that's for the best. So go read the work of art and go back and check out Adam's work on New York Magazine, because that was a special 15 years for that book. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week with interesting conversations with all sorts of fascinating cultural figures. In this case, people who know how to bring together other fascinating cultural figures and make great conversation. Now, you can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or art gallery exhibition or theater or sandcastle or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email, by sending me a postcard or a letter. My mailing address is at the bottom of the newsletter I send out twice a week. Or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number. That's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. If you go longer than that, you'll get cut off. Just call back, leave another message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the speaker's permission. So, let me know. Now, if you got money to spare, don't give it to me, or at least save it. I'm going to have a Kickstarter later this year for the book that I'm making. You can give me 30, 40, 50 bucks, whatever, at that point and get a copy of what I'm calling guest host. But we'll see what the final form of it is. It won't be as big as the work of art, but it'll still be good. Give money to other people. Give money to institutions. With people, you can go through like GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, all those crowdfunding platforms. You'll find people who need help with making rent, making medical bills, car payments, veterinary bills, or other things, or trying maybe to get an artistic project off the ground. A lot of people can be in tough circumstances, and you can make a real difference in their lives by helping out with just a couple of bucks here and there. Now, with institutions, I give to my local food bank every month. Started making contributions to World Central Kitchen after the massacre in Gaza. But there are other things you can do. Planned Parenthood, election funds, freedom funds, all sorts of different foundations and institutions you can give to. The Poor People's Campaign. What I'm saying is, we can try to help build a better world, and it doesn't take too much. So, I hope you'll help out. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.